Okay, so I imagine even if you don't know very much about tortoise conservation, you'll know a little bit about this guy. Yeah, Lonesome George, okay? Up until very recently, he was at the top of the list of extinction in terms of he was the last of his kind. You had, does anyone know? Galapagos tortoise, okay? Very, very closely related to the vein of thought that's going on this weekend. So I thought I would start with his picture. He's one of 11 unique species that are on individual islands throughout the Galapagos, and unfortunately we lost him last year. So now at the top of the list, the focus is on Madagascar. With Madagascar, unfortunately, because the indigenous people that live there, unfortunately, if a tortoise wanders across their path, it represents a meal for their family, and it's very hard to fight that. Also, because they are very pretty animals, so the first one is the meat on the left. It's a local delicacy. They used to eat Madagascan tortoises only for Christmas and Easter to celebrate special occasions, and actually it was considered taboo to actually eat radiated tortoises. Unfortunately now, with the younger generation and the trendy generation, it's now seen as a bar snack. And unfortunately, unsustainable amounts of animals are being slaughtered just for little accompaniments to your alcoholic drink in the cities. And they reckon that these animals are likely to be extinct within the next 5 years if no intervention takes place. Also, because of their very pretty markings, the smaller specimens are ending up in suitcases. As you see on the right is a seizure of 530 animals 6 months ago, which were destined for Jakarta, which is the hub where they're then sent out to all the different Asian cities where they're considered a status pet. It's now widely accepted that Madagascan species are worth more than their weight in gold. And because of that, Chinese culture, there's only a few of these left and I've got one. It unfortunately is the mentality. So this is something that the conservation organisations are up against at the moment. And we're a little unsure how to tackle it really, because unfortunately, even if these people are caught, they don't, the punishments don't necessarily reflect the crime. So it's not a human, it's an animal. So we have an annual meeting, we have working panels, and we're all looking at different ways of trying to make sure that these animals, we're not going to lose these animals and that they're here for future generations. Some of the work on the ground is working in schools, funding to actually try and educate the next generation, not to understand and be proud of their natural wildlife, and there has been a lot of success in that area. On an international level, we sit on a lot of government panels to try and influence legislation, and we also work with police to try and prevent a lot of bribery and corruption that goes on even when animals are seized, to try and make sure that these animals then at least go into assurance colonies and breeding programs across the world. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. I was given a tortoise when I was about 8 years old and told it's that or nothing, because my mum is Asian. We used to go away for 2 or 3 months of the year in the winter, and it was ideal because it would sleep. Once I had a tortoise, I realised there was very little information, and when I got to college I met some other people who were interested in setting up a group, and like a lot of us do with hobbies, we join a club. I became one of the founding members who developed it. We're now in our 11th year. We've actually got over 1,000 registered members, and we're just about to move internationally, because we're now dealing with so many people who are out of our region that we can now justify actually having a subscription and newsletters and actually trying to work and actually influence helping tortoises sort of throughout Europe, in fact. Just to give you a bit of background, you're saying, well, do that many people have many tortoises? I don't know. It's estimated that over 10 million tortoises were imported into the UK alone before the blanket ban that stopped tortoises being imported from the wild. Okay, a lot of those tortoises are still lurking in people's back gardens. There were some statistics to say that 90% died within the first 12 months. I think a lot did die within the first 12 months, mainly because of poor diet, being fed a junk food diet, because they were also hibernated for too long, because our English winters are far longer than they would naturally hibernate in the wild, or they fell in the pond, eaten by the dog, or ran away, because they're very good at escaping. Okay, so there were major husbandry issues that were never addressed. And we're now met again with this problem because there are now lots of tortoises coming back into the pet trade, because as long as they're bred in captivity, you are allowed to sell them under licence. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think it's very important to inspire the public and particularly the next generation to be interested in the natural world. I mean, certainly it's inspired me to have a lifelong obsession in natural science. So I'm not like a lot of animal organisations which think, no one should keep pets, we should ban it all. And I think it's important, but I think also we need to be working and be ahead of the game and encouraging people to look after these animals properly. So the next step, now we've got such a big movement, is I created something called Tortoise Welfare UK. Now the idea of this was to be an umbrella organisation that brought a large majority of small groups that are all over the UK and Europe and bring everyone together to try and encourage more collaboration throughout trade, throughout the zoo fraternity, privates, and also veterinary. Okay, because at the moment everyone sort of works separately, and obviously we all know, many hands make light work, and it's very difficult because everyone has lots of different opinions. But the idea is to try and organise collaboration, particularly when it comes to exchanging animals and setting up programmes for what you might call sort of little brown tortoises that maybe might not be so good in zoo collections, especially with economic climate and zoo cuts sort of going down all the time. So I just wanted to kind of give you a visual of sort of my organisation and sort of how we work. We actually do a lot of rescue rehabilitation. We do hospital work. We work with veterinary colleges, and I would say we've definitely rehomed over 100 animals this year. So quite a busy time. We also do training workshops with vet nurses. We also do consultancy work as well, working with different government organisations. My roots is working with the general public, and every month I run a club night. We average 80 to 100 people, and we have lectures on how to grow healthy plants for tortoises, so that's weeds and flowers, not junk food, vegetables and fruit, which is far too fattening for tortoises to eat. Like I said, when I did this, it was 800 registered members, but we are actually now over 1,000. So there is a really big following with tortoises, and one point that I wanted to make is they are an excellent tool to inspire people to be interested in looking after their environment and the natural world, and at the moment that's why Tortoise Welfare UK started. For those of you who are interested in the variety of tortoises that are kept in the UK, this is a list of the most commonly kept species. The top 4: Hermann's tortoises. A lot of people keep Russian tortoises. Unfortunately, they're not protected under CITES law, so they're still collected from the wild and brought in their thousands. And then we've got spur-thigh tortoises, Testudo grica. This is where it starts getting complicated. They have an absolutely amazing range right across North Africa and Southern Europe, and subsequently there's lots of different subspecies which I've listed there. And then we also get leopard tortoises and African spur-thigh tortoises, which are a desert species that don't hibernate. And then we get the jungle species, something that probably Wallace would have come across during his travels, the South American jungle, or Indian star tortoises as well. So just to give you a visual, so quite a lot of varieties and all with different care requirements. Just a snapshot of the kind of enclosures that we encourage. All research has shown that tortoises are very in tune with their natural environments. So if you can replicate that at home, your tortoise is going to thrive more easily. So here we've got lots of different textures, a wide variety of weeds and flowers to feed on, so there's lots of natural vitamins and minerals and lots of fibre there. And the tortoise is free to graze and actually regulate its own temperature throughout the day. And on bad days, it's got a greenhouse where it can be warm enough, and when it's really bad, I don't know if you can see in the back, there's actually a heat lamp as well. People really love their tortoises in England and go to great lengths to look after quite exotic species. So you're looking at a giant Saharan desert tortoise which can reach up to 60 kilos in weight. Okay, these guys get really poorly if they're not kept warm enough. So purpose-built outbuildings, state-of-the-art insulation, oil central heating, UV heating, you're looking at least £1,000 in electricity just to get these tortoises through the winter. But people do it. The rest of the year is fine because they mainly eat grass, a bit like cows, but in the winter, yeah, this is happening. I'll pop this in just to make you smile. We do a lot of community work, working with the local police and going to big shows. This is actually at the Royal Norfolk Show. They boast that it's the largest event in the region, where they think they get 200,000 people over 2 days come through the gate. So it's a great way to raise awareness and recruit people for rehoming and make contacts. A big thing that we promote is our climate is not as nice as where tortoises come from, and unfortunately very often it's not as naturally rich in calcium. So you have to supplement with a good vitamin supplement and also by giving them access to things like chalk lump. If you don't, you have problems with deformed shells and also things like the loss of back legs. And as you can see, we've got tortoise on wheels there, having some rehabilitation work. You can sometimes get back mobility, but it takes a very long time for tortoise to lose the use of its back legs, and it takes even longer for it to get back, which is why we do so much preventative work, trying to get people to learn before there's a problem. Like I said earlier, we work with veterinary colleges. This is Cambridge Royal Veterinary College. We took 12 species of Chelonian to Cambridge last month, both sick specimens, male and female, lots of different varieties, and they were all MRI scanned in order to have reference points for veterinary medicine, and it's just one of the small, just one example of the kind of thing that we're doing to try and improve welfare and also conservation knowledge. And this is actually a giant Aldebaran tortoise, a Seychelles giant, going through the MRI scanner in Cambridge. It's another little chap. So you might be wondering, how do you get a tortoise to sit still? You can't, like, tell it. So with the local guys, they were actually being bound up. Their legs were being bound, so they couldn't go anywhere. And then they were going zipping in and out of the MRI scanner. So I thought it was quite a sweet picture. Okay, just looking at keeping in Europe today, just a little bit more. At the moment, research has shown that over 250,000 reptiles and amphibians are bred in the UK each year. Estimated that over 1.2 million households are home to 7 million pet reptiles. And this is the one you're not going to believe. Given the industry growth rate, it is widely accepted that Britain now has more reptiles in private homes than dogs. Okay, so sort of for you to visualise. So reptile keepers represent quite a large amount of the population, and based on that, you can say we've done very good market research. And reptiles are a very good way to educate the public because they're, they love their pet, It's a good way it's a way of accessing a large proportion of society and encouraging them to be interested in conservation. That's the theory. And we work with lots of other organisations that specialise in their particular area as well, so snakes, reptiles. I sit on the panel for a group called the Federation of British Herpetologists, and these are actually their statistics. And this is sort of we've all agreed that we have a common interest and we all work together to do things on that front. I'll just whiz through these. These were more for when I was in America. You might be saying, well, where are all these tortoises coming from? A lot of people are breeding in their backyards, but obviously not 300,000. So what we're doing is that we're actually farming on a commercial level in countries like Slovenia. And as you can see, massive commercial greenhouses like you get in Holland, all with small breeding groups of 4 to 5 in each pod. Netting, so they can't lay eggs just anywhere, so there's one area just to check for nesting sites. Once they've harvested the eggs and the hatchlings have hatched, they're then shipped to units. There's some in England where they're kept under UV light, given artificial vitamin D3, calcium supplement mash, and misted, so there's humidity, and then force grown and then sent out to the various pet shops that they're required to go to. Personally, I think it's better to encourage captive breeding, private captive breeding, and I'm not convinced this is a good idea. Tortoises live easily 80 to 100 years, okay? If you do the math, we're going to have a lot of tortoises. So I'm just, at the moment, it's like, okay, this industry is worth a lot of money. I mean, it employs a lot of people. You can't just walk up and say, oh, we've got to ban it. You've actually got to maybe be a bit clever and think about, well, how are you going to move forward? So, just to tell you about one problem. Just an interesting picture, the other side of the trade, the illegal trade. This is a picture that came to my attention a few months ago. These are Ethiopian giant tortoises. Very rare. There isn't actually a captive breeding programme that is set up at the moment, and these animals were available for £1,000 each through a dealer in Spain, who were informed managed to get them out of the country through using the Ethiopian mafia. I want to show you a little bit about the field work. We're quite keen to try and set up programmes which are closer to home that people can relate to. Birtheye tortoises in captivity, a lot of them have come from North Africa, and so we were trying to find out a little bit more about their current situation. A lot of these tortoises are being found on markets because tourists like to look at them. They might buy them for a few pounds, put them in their bag and take them home. This is a happy tortoise. Okay, Moroccan tortoise. You can still find them out there in pockets. Unfortunately, a lot of the sites that are reported to be habitats no longer exist because of overgrazing from sheep and cattle. And the idea of the field trip in April was to try and capture some data about how these animals live in the wild, to try and record it before it vanishes altogether. So taking UV readings, temperature readings, and these were the kind of habitats that we're finding. Lots of different vegetation, and again, lots of flowers, and actually lots of lumps of chalk as well. So calcium, lots of calcium. Some more data reading. Okay, just the last section of my presentation is to talk about the coordinating of breeding programmes that are going on throughout the world, but there is also an HQ in Europe. I'm on the panel for it, and it's the Turtle Survival Alliance and the European Studbook Foundation. The idea is to try and maintain genetic diversity for the future in captivity. The idea is that because there's so many little pockets in so many habitats, we can't guarantee there's going to be enough genetic diversity for all these different species to make sure that they're there for future generations. So the idea is that we're working with private collections and zoos to breed, and then we've got people that hold the different stud books. And this is just a snapshot of the success of some of the rarest tortoises on the planet. And these are actually all clutches that have been bred in Europe. Okay, and there's some pictures of some of the weird and wonderful turtles that you can find. A lot of those are Asian species. They get a hard time in Asia because there's a lot of myth surrounding turtles. A lot of Chinese believe that if you eat the ground up shell of a turtle, particularly a very rare one, it will cure you of cancer. So unfortunately they're in such small numbers, we've got no choice but to breed in captivity. A very small little guy that's hatched out this year. And again, there's a lot of science behind it. I'm not a doctor, but a lot of these guys working on these programmes are, and they're recording data as they go along to try and influence, to try and help the work that's going on in the field as well. Try to understand these animals a little bit more. Another weird one, the Vietnamese. So again, just to remind you, a big problem that these turtles are facing is loss of habitat, being eaten, and then also going into the pet trade as well. It's a bit of a problem when in some cases there's only 2% of its habitat left. They look like dinosaurs. I don't know if a lot of you realise, but a lot of the species are actually directly connected with the Triceratops period. They've evolved very little. Their design was perfect to start with. So, special little guys. Okay, just to finish, we don't just send white guys out to go and do field work. We actually try and train up locals. And this is in Egypt. And we actually have Bedouin rangers going out in secure locations, firstly protecting the animals, but then also following and studying their natural behaviour so we can learn more about them. And then as well as the programmes in captivity, where this miniature species, it's one of the smallest tortoises in the world, we've actually got 455 specimens in the programme at the moment in Europe. So, just to recap, the idea is I'm not trying to be the next Andy Highfield, if anyone knows who that is. The idea is to create an umbrella organisation that brings together lots of NGOs and zoo-led organisations like EASA, European Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and trying to get everyone to be a little bit more productive. And the kind of things that we're working on is an annual conference in Europe, more website presence, subscriptions, European e-newsletter to try and create a community and keep everyone in touch, collaboration, and then hopefully long term doing more field work and also working internationally with other countries. So, if anyone is captivated by that lot of information, our next conference is going to be in November. We're being kindly hosted by Colchester Zoo. And there's a weekend of lectures, and the dates are the 8th, 9th and 10th of November. And we've also planned our first international conference for May 2014 in London. So you can find out more by visiting these websites, so tortoisewelfare.co.uk and turtlesurvivalalliance.eu. Thank you for listening.
Our winter is too long for it. If people have one as a pet, what should they do? Should they put it in bright lights sort of at the end of the...
You can now get state-of-the-art lighting, so like combi bulbs that actually emit vitamin D3, which is the vitamin that they vitally need from the sun to make sure that they can metabolise calcium and have a healthy system. So basically you have to give supplementary light. What we normally advise is if you can't afford a combi bulb, which is normally about £30, at the very least just a desk lamp, just to make sure that they're getting a little bit of heat on the top of their shell. It's normally enough just to keep the tortoise going in the utility room or shed whilst you're winding it down ready to go into hibernation. So you're looking at a month at the end of the year and the beginning of the year where you've just got to have a halfway house, whether that be a greenhouse or an indoor space. Has anyone else got a question?
Do turtles carry bugs and parasites?
They carry a lot of parasites. There's actually one of the other programs that we're working on is bloods and swabs to actually try and determine a little bit more about the bugs that tortoises can carry. They found that a lot can't be transmitted to humans. One of them is herpes virus. Seems to be in a lot of species of tortoise, but it's one that sort of just stays within the tortoise world. But it's why it's so important not to mix different subspecies, because they all have different immune systems, and you can wipe out an existing collection by introducing an animal that's been exposed to different bugs.
Salmonella?
There is salmonella, but it tends to be meat eaters and poor husbandry that causes salmonella. Normally, most tortoises are herbivores and don't get salmonella.
They're not a health hazard?
They're not a health hazard, no.
Generally?
No, if you had a child with leukemia, I wouldn't recommend that you had a tortoise. But I wouldn't recommend you had any pet, really, so, that you had to touch. So, but yeah, in low risk, I think. I mean, we always encourage using alcohol gel, like between handling, but you would with any pet. So no, there's certainly no heightened dangers keeping a tortoise. And actually, once you're set up, they're very low maintenance.
On the slide, you showed the different types of tortoises. You mentioned one kind is still being imported. Was that legal or illegal?
Legal. They're not protected under CITES law like you do with birds of prey. There's no restriction on still harvesting them from their natural range and putting them into the pet trade. So unfortunately they don't normally adapt very well, and very often they have more parasites than ones that have been reared in an artificial environment with no access to
it's still legal
parasites.
To import tortoises?
It is, yeah, but only to certain species.
I was curious because I knew of a girl who had a tortoise very recently and he died, and he was quite young, and I think he was forced out of hibernation too soon, and that's what she thought, because she thought her partner may have tried to take her back. And I don't think she thought she was cruel, but I was wondering if, from looking at her lifestyle, it was very cruel the way she was handling this tortoise in her life, because it was a London lifestyle, it was in an apartment. And I'm just curious, do people, when they're sold these animals, are they being educated on how to look after them?
In short, no. There are no basic guidelines that are required at point of sale. And that is one thing that we're trying to do. Like the guinea pig and rabbit fraternity have done a lot to promote and make law that has to be a set standard. You know, you have to sell an environment that's of a certain size, and you have to tell them to feed the correct food and supplement. At the moment, you could sell a tortoise and tell them to feed them marshmallows, and you're not breaking the law. So, I mean, that's one thing that needs to be fixed. So it's really common.
Yeah.
I had a question about how well tortoises are able to protect themselves from predators. Perhaps I'm just asking this out of ignorance, but if a dog was to try and get at a tortoise, is it able to withdraw completely in the shell to avoid being eaten? Can you give us a feel for how that works?
Different tortoises are more suited than others. Like the leopard tortoise, one of their biggest predators is big cats,
right.
But they do have very hard shells and they are quite good at getting inside. But if you have a young tortoise, their carapace is not as robust, and a big cat can crunch straight through it. So very often hatchlings are very shy in order to try and survive into adulthood. And once they've reached adulthood, they've got more chance of making it. Unfortunately, the biggest predator is humans. And it's quite hard to get around that. But pets and dogs and foxes and mice and rats, unfortunately, are one of the biggest problems.
Are they social animals? I mean, does one tortoise relate to another? Does a tortoise on its own get lonely?
Most species are solitary animals, and they only meet to mate. And actually, males can be very aggressive. Their courtship is to bite and bash. And actually, it can be very cruel to keep a male in a small enclosure with another male or female. and again we get husbandry problems on that front. There are some exceptions to the rule, like South American redfoot tortoises, like I spoke about, are actually very gentle and can live in groups, but the most commonly kept pet species are aggressive, and females are friendly, males are nasty and need to be kept separate.
Just like you.
Yeah.
So on this slide you've got turtle survival. What's the difference between a turtle and a turtle?
If you're American, anything with a carapace is a turtle.
Oh.
Okay. In England, and actually internationally, turtle is recognised as the generic common name. Chelonian is sort of the Latin. But in England, it's semi-aquatic. Terrapin is a freshwater turtle that lives on land and water. A turtle is sea, and a tortoise is terrestrial.
Okay.
Good question.
Is there still a trade in things like turtle wax and this sort of thing?
Turtle wax, fortunately, there isn't a trade. Chinese is the closest to a physical trade in terms of consumption, in terms of the medicinal qualities to cancer. But obviously, turtle wax, as you know about, was the final demise of the Galapagos tortoises. The whalers, when they were having a bad time with the restrictions with whaling, they would go out and they would stalk the waterholes and they would slit the throats of the Galapagos tortoises just for half a bucket of wax or oil, burning oil. It's just a shame that they tasted too good. So tortoises, unfortunately. There's a very interesting book called The Unexpected History of the Giant Tortoise, which was written by a guy called Paul Chambers from the Natural History Museum, and I really recommend it if you're interested in the history. It's a brilliant book, even if you're not a tortoise keeper.
What has happened to the Galapagos tortoises then?
There's lots of breeding programs going on. Unfortunately, several species are now extinct and only in museums. But there's a lot of the islands are now out of bounds, and they're trying to breed in captivity and release into the.
With regard to the idea that in the Chinese culture they think it's a cure for cancer, is that just sort of like a folklore, or is that incorporated in traditional Chinese medicine?
In Chinese medicine, it's the same with the problem of rhino horn and that rhinos are vanishing. It's exactly the same.
I mean, what is happening with the Chinese government to get them to persuade their population that these things are ridiculous?
Well, this is why we're sort of trying to take a constructive approach of trying to have people who sit on these panels within Europe who can then put pressure on the Asian governments to try and... It's the bigger picture and public awareness. I mean, it's just going to take time. And in the meantime, it's taking animals and trying to maintain the genetics for a time when everyone has come to their senses. But it's not going to happen overnight because it's worth so much money. It's like the ivory trade. Okay, I'm going to be around for a bit, so if anyone's got any more questions, you can come up and ask me.